Hey, it's Concrete. So I promised to have a sort of debriefing video for all those Flavorah tests. So today I kind of wanted to go over my favorite flavors, I guess, out of that batch, and since they're being sold on Bull City and Nicotine River right now, kind of debrief from some of that, some of the stuff I liked, some of the stuff I didn't like, talk a little bit about sort of the way that I use Flavorah flavors. And then I did have a question from Alaska Vapor about, like my testing setup and kind of the procedure for some of that. So I'll go ahead and ramble about that for a while. So I know you're used to laser focused, really tight content here. So this is going to be a little bit rambly. Just sort of talking about the way that I mix with Flavorah flavors and some of the things that I think that they do well. So I do like Flavorah flavors quite a bit, and I think part of that is because I sort of consider myself a very hobbyist mixer in that I mix a lot because I enjoy it. I enjoy messing around with flavor. Some of Flavorah stuff is absolutely phenomenal. It's absolutely best in class, and some of the other stuff is really interesting stuff that you can't get anywhere else. And that kind of tends to be when I go to Flavorah. It's kind of hard to get around the price point on them, though, and that's the entire thing. And you can sugarcoat that all you want, but the fact of the matter is that it's an expensive flavoring company in general. Two things that kind of work for me with that: they do a lot of things that I don't see other people doing. Their pink guava flavor is absolutely fantastic. I love their elderflower. Their Yakima hops flavor. All these flavors are really interesting flavors that don't really have another good equivalent. So it's not like I can sit down and like pencil out the costs there. They do a pretty good job of developing interesting flavors that kind of speak to me a lot as a hobbyist mixer. They do a lot of things that I don't see other flavoring companies do, which I enjoy. And sort of more from a, I guess, philosophical standpoint, which, how douchey does that sound? But I do appreciate the fact that they support the DIY community in general, and they actually interface with the community in general. They actually give a shit when you say that something isn't working for you. It's nice to have that level of outreach, especially when you're dealing with companies like Flavor West and Capella. And, we're not Flavor West or Capella's main business by any stretch of the imagination. Both because, vaping isn't their primary focus. And, they don't want to be lumped in with that industry. But also, DIY isn't really on their radar. I think Flavor Art does engage with the DIY community quite a bit, which is cool. Flavorah, I think, goes even a little bit further than that. And I really do appreciate that. As salty as people get that they see mixers getting these Flavorah flavors for free, which, I'm completely guilty of that too. I mean, I didn't pay for this last batch of flavors. I have their entire line. I didn't pay for most of that, although I did buy about 30 or 35 Flavorah flavors before they gave me the rest of the line. It's a little frustrating to see a whole bunch of people getting a bunch of free stuff and telling you to use it when that price point gets a little bit excessive. I think there's a lot of instances in which their flavors are completely worth it for me. Like I said, they're interesting stuff. They're pink guavas, they're elderflowers. I also really feel like they have some concentrates which are absolutely bar none some of like the best concentrates for what they want to do. Their rich cinnamon is $12.49 a bottle. Their clove is $12.49 a bottle. I think their cream's one of the cheaper ones, but it's still $5.49 a bottle. These are fantastic flavors, and really there is no direct equivalent for them. So yeah, with all that said, I know I sound like a shill or whatever, but I use a lot of Flavorah because honestly, I kind of like the way that those flavors mix. They tend to be really good as sort of bright accent flavors. There's not a whole lot of like base notes in Flavorah, and when you do find one, like their mango, it's kind of interesting and you kind of have to note it. A lot of it's like really aggressive top note stuff that works well at low percentages. So out of this last batch of flavors, there was like 27 that I got a chance to review, 28 if you count the apple in there. I did have some favorites. And as a vapor, I tend to prefer sort of interesting stuff, sort of weird stuff. And I admit I go a little bit weird for the sake of weird sometimes, but I like to be surprised. And if it came down to it, I think I'm definitely more of a fruit vapor than anything else. I really like bright, interesting fruits, stuff like that. So my top 5 from this last batch of flavors, I'd probably go for their apricot flavor. I think it's a really nice sort of deep, bright apricot that's going to go well in a lot of places. I think, again, it's kind of like their mango, where it's not going to call too much attention to itself. But at the same time, I think it's going to blend really well with a lot of different fruit flavors. I did also enjoy their blackberry blossom quite a bit. Part of that is because I think it's interesting. There is a really, really good blackberry flavor in there. The blossom stuff isn't as bad as you'd think. And you saw, if you watched my blackberry video, you saw exactly what I thought of Flavor Art's blackberry, which I'd say is much more floral than this. This is kind of like an interesting musky flavors. So if you're into interesting fruits, I'd definitely suggest their blackberry blossom. If you're thinking, oh, I'm going to use this to make like a blackberry pie, it's probably not your best choice, but I did really enjoy it. I really like their vanilla bean flavor too. I like the fact that it works a lot like a vanillin, but it is a darker, spicier sort of vanilla additive that tends to do really interesting things to concentrates and mixes that already have some vanilla in there. So I really appreciated that. That's actually their cheaper vanilla too. I believe it's like $6.50 or whatever for a 15 milliliter bottle. So, I mean, that's good, and it's in the range of affordable, and I think that it's strong enough that I think there's a pretty good value proposition there, especially if you're really into messing around with vanillas or florals or anything like that. I think it's going to be really interesting. I also like their Moscato flavor quite a bit, and the Moscato thing, I'm not even necessarily saying it's one of the best flavors out of this bunch, but as somebody who really enjoys like bright fruit flavors, I liked how strong and clear that white grape was, and then as you started to increase the percentage, I really like that weird sort of green back end on that. But you're talking to somebody who can vape a lot of like Inaware's rhubarb and absolutely dig it. So it's definitely not just a straight ahead white grape flavor, but I feel like it's a really interesting fruit base. And then their morning mimosa, which I'm not gonna lie, gonna be kind of a pain in the ass to work with, but I really enjoy the fact that they kind of went outside of the box. I think it's gonna be a good base flavor for a whole bunch of cocktail stuff. It's definitely gonna be a little bit difficult, and I'm not even sure that it tastes fantastic, but it does definitely interest me. So some honorable mentions. I'm just going to say it, Smooth Vanilla. I don't like actively try to censor my YouTube comments. I saw a notification somebody had posted like, okay, Smooth Vanilla is great and all, but $17.49, fucking no chance I'm paying that. And I completely and totally understand that. I don't know where that comment went. If you left that comment, I'm sorry. It disappeared somewhere and I can't like approve it. It just isn't there anymore. But I completely and totally understand that. Like I was saying, the price point on Flavorah flavors is a bit of a pain in the ass. And with like their rich cinnamon and their clove flavor, they are that much better than the other available flavors. I think the Smooth Vanilla in some ways sort of suffers from the competition because there are a whole bunch of very competent vanilla flavors out there that are a whole lot cheaper. I think if you're super into vanilla, if you really want to like get weird on the hobbyist side and you don't mind spending some serious money, I think it's a good concentrate. I really do. But the price point's just a little bit out of whack, even for as relatively concentrated as it is. I also think their granola flavor kind of deserves an honorable mention. Mostly because I haven't seen another granola flavor. It's not the be all end all like, hey, let's go ahead and pop some granola on top of that yogurt parfait. Like, it isn't as sweet as you'd like. It's a little darker, a little bit more cooked, and it's definitely a top note. It definitely just sits right at the like top of a mix. And so there's some structural issues. But it does honestly taste like granola, and that's something that I haven't really run across before. And so I think that it'd be a good base to kind of play around with, to kind of find a way to pull that into like a more friendly, less aggressive granola flavor. But I'd give it an honorable mention just because, again, it's trying to do something that nobody else does. And I think it's largely successful with a couple of reservations. My next honorable mention would be the Lembas bread flavor, which despite being named for bullshit make-believe elf stuff is actually pretty good. It's a muffin base. And again, that's something that I haven't really seen another good option for a muffin base. And so if you are absolutely chasing after that kind of muffin profile, I think it's definitely worth a look. Is it great enough that if you aren't interested specifically in creating a muffin, that you absolutely need to run out and pick it up? No, probably not. But I feel that way about most concentrates, actually. Like, if you're not interested in the profile, I wouldn't even worry about it. It's more trying to pick out what profiles you're interested in and then finding the tools to do that right, as opposed to just buying a whole bunch of stuff on impulse and trying to figure out what to do with it later. I have to give an honorable mention to root beer. It is a very, very good root beer flavor. But it's kind of top heavy for me. I think that you're going to need another root beer in the base, or you're going to have to crank this up to like 3-4% with root beer. And at that point, like that cost kind of starts to get to you again. You know, I think it's a really good root beer flavor. If you're a huge root beer fan, I'd definitely pick it up. But it's not necessarily like the most economical way to get a root beer, even though it is a really good root beer flavor. So if you're into florals at all, actually I'd give a huge honorable mention to their Sugar Orchid and their Cherry Blossom. I think they're two really interesting floral flavors. To me, they go better together to kind of make like a full cherry blossom, but the Sugar Orchid is like a floral vanilla with a little bit of like a chalky body and some cherry notes. The Cherry Blossom is more like an actual floral take on a cherry blossom. I think if you're into florals, and you know, there are some people out there that absolutely dig on florals, this is definitely another good addition. You don't have too many options, that kind of space, and I think these are two very solid flavors for that. And finally, my last honorable mention would be their peppermint flavor. It's a really good peppermint. It's super strong. The mentholation in it's very smooth. It's a very, very solid peppermint. And I think the reason that I'm not going to say it's one of my favorite flavors out of this batch is it's an expensive concentrate. And unlike the clove and the rich cinnamon and maybe even the smooth vanilla, it doesn't absolutely blow the other ones out of the water. Like, it's good. It's definitely good, but I don't feel like it's playing an entirely different game like I do with the clove and the rich cinnamon. So there were a couple out of this last release that didn't really work for me. I will say, first off, I wasn't a big fan of the nectarine flavor. Starts off super promising, but I can't deal with those kind of harsh cherry plastic notes in there. And the throat hit on it's absolutely brutal. I have no doubt that if you like cherry flavors or you don't mind those kind of off notes, I mean, you could probably get it to work. And there is a really good nectarine in there, but it's just the off notes are a little bit too much for me. And I don't need to be punched that hard in the throat on a regular basis. The next one that didn't really hit for me was probably the hazelnut. Again, super concentrated flavor. Like, you got to give them marks for at least the flavor being potent, but it was a little green for me. And honestly, that's not really what I'm looking for in a hazelnut. Even something like Flavorah's Hazel Grove, which is, you know, sort of ragged on for being a more raw hazelnut, I found that to be less raw than the Flavorah hazelnut. And then on the sort of, hey, let's throw out a random contrarian opinion side, their graham cracker flavor. So it's a good graham cracker flavor. It's a good flavor, but it doesn't really do enough, and it's going to be a little bit harder to work with than, you know, the other available cheap graham cracker flavors. And I think that's kind of my thing with Flavorah. Like, I want them to swing for the fences on their flavors, and when they release something that's kind of middle of the road, I'm just like, okay, yeah, that's fine, but I don't know if it's worth like the actual price premium on something like that. If you were pretending to pay attention to the actual flavor talk, that's cool. You can turn this off now. But Alaska Vapor had some questions about my testing setup, and so I'll just go over it. So I use the OG recoil for my flavor testing, the first version, and I use the Flavor flavor cap or whatever with the 2.5 millimeter airflow holes. It just works for me. The flavor is pretty good for a bigger RDA, and since I've got like a giant head and, you know, commensurately large lips, I find that if I'm trying to use like a smaller flavor setup like the Hadley or the Narda or whatever, I just burn the shit out of my lips. And so I like to vape in the recoil. So I do most of my testing in the recoil. And it's also super easy to rebuild, which is a big thing. I feel like there's like this level of mystery about flavor testing that really shouldn't be there. So I'll be the first person to state outright, and I try to mention this when people like talk about it. My palate isn't fantastic. It really isn't. I'm not a super taster. There's no place for me in like some lab giving some people notes or anything like that. I'm just kind of a regular person with big dumb taste buds, and I think some of the skill in flavor testing, more than anything else, it basically comes down to just doing the work. So if you already have, 50 concentrates, if you have 100 concentrates, if you sit down and you single flavor test each one of those concentrates, you're pretty much de facto going to become an expert on flavor testing. It's just like a skill that I feel like you really need to develop if you are going to be mixing beyond just like, hey, here's a bottle of cheap juice. If you're actually sort of getting into the circle jerky hobby aspect of DIY where you want to do cool stuff with flavors, I think the first big step is to actually sort of know the tools that you're working with. And my own flavor testing kind of started out like that. I got like in over my head, got super excited about making juice and all that. And then like kind of realized one day that, holy shit, I have no idea why any of this is working. And so I went back to a more fundamental level and kind of just been chugging through like single flavor tests. And there's been kind of a hole for people that have enough context to sort of put a flavor where it needs to be and give some relational points, and who can actually communicate what they're tasting. And I think that more than, having some like crazy fucking like scientific palette, like some reference palette. I think more than anything, I think the biggest skill that you need to learn in flavor testing, if you want to like be able to share your notes and stuff like that, is just being able to relate flavor to people. And even if you want to be able to go back and like check out your notes later, if you end up writing like 2 sentences like green and bad, like 3 months, you're not going to remember what the hell that meant, and you aren't going to have like a specific memory tied into that. And so the more you can elucidate what you're tasting, the better your notes will be for you. And then if you wanted to go in and kind of get more involved on the community side of things, the easier it is for other people to follow along on your notes. Flavor testing doesn't have to be super daunting, and the best setup for you to use while flavor testing is the setup that you vape with. Assuming that, you're not like using pre-built coils and all that. I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer, but beyond like, probably don't use a sub tank, but in terms of like RDAs and stuff, just use what you're comfortable with. I mean, if you are a 150 watt fucking fused clapped in cloud bro, test at 150 watts with a fused clapped in. Like, you're developing recipes that you actually want to vape. And you can try to adapt stuff later on for, hey, what happens if I put it in this kind of setup? What I put in, that setup or anything like that. But the sooner you get tangible results from all the work that you're doing, the more encouraged you are going to be to sort of continue. So if you want to chuck massive clouds while you're testing and worry about the details later. If you think that you can't do flavor notes, or you have a trash palette or whatever, like sit down with like 3 different concentrates that are supposed to be the same thing from 3 different companies and compare them. Like you could use like blueberries, like TPA's Blueberry Extra is a decent flavor. Flavor Arts Bilberry is a decent flavor, and Flavor West Blueberry are all good flavors, and they're all blueberries, but they're all very different. And so it's a matter of being able to test all of those and sort of elucidate the differences between those concentrates, and sort of talk about what's going on there and how they differ and how they're similar. And you just need to sort of put it in context and put it in a form that is going to help you later on, so you don't have to retest everything. You can go back, you can read your notes, you can know how your palate works, and you can build from those notes instead of having to just fly blind on all your mixes. So yeah, I hope that didn't sound like some sort of self-righteous rant or anything, but I got a question about it, so that's fine. Personally, I just use like round wire builds for all my testing, and I tend to like temperature control, just so I can actually like vape the cotton dry. I will say that I'm a big believer in swapping your wicks whenever you change flavor, especially if you're going to be testing things. And so I have like the $9 giant Fast Tech like bag of cotton pads that I use, and I just keep everything re-wicked when I switch flavors. And honestly, it's just finding a method of testing that's going to work for you and that's going to give you the kind of results that you want. So sorry about the rant, but I do hope that helps in some way. If you are interested in those Flavorah flavors, they do go on sale. They're probably on sale right now, actually, at Bull City Flavors and Nicotine River. So if you go back, I've tested all of them. There's YouTube videos, and each of those YouTube videos has Reddit links for like individual flavor reviews too. So you can use that for a little bit of additional help if you want. But yeah, thank you for watching. I do appreciate it. I'll catch you later.